Fallout 4, just like all the other games I've covered so far, has its fair share of mysterious moments, glitches, and unintentional oddities that have inspired its very own online oral history. From strange sounds that defy explanation to NPCs behaving far outside their scripted bounds, these tales have been shared online for years. And yes, I'm going to use the digital campfire imagery again, evolving into urban legends that spread across the Fallout community and beyond. Our journey in this video will explore some of Fallout 4's most obscure, spine-chilling and inexplicable player stories, as well as a couple of legends that will be more well known to most of you. These stories, whether you find some of them completely unbelievable or have heard of some of them before, are all part of the shared oral history of Fallout 4 that's developed since the game's release. To me, they're all a fascinating outgrowth of the community that can form around a game in the years after its release. As ever, I've enjoyed digging these tales up. I hope you enjoy hearing them. Let's begin our journey into the urban legends of Fallout 4. To kick this journey off, we're going to look at a player report from 2016 relating to one of Fallout 4's creepiest legitimate phenomena, the ghost girl of the Grand Chester Mystery Mansion. As many players will know, venturing into this dilapidated roadside attraction, they find themselves sneaking around an interior that's positively brimming with lore, environmental storytelling, and jump-scare-laden design. But what takes this well-known location and spooky activity to the next level is the ghost girl herself, and some reported oddities. For many players, the ghost girl is as she was designed to be, an orchestrated scare. Her fleeting appearances, the ominous sound cues, and the story of the mansion all combine to create a fully intentional, spooky ambience. However, for some players, her behaviour goes beyond what was intended, plunging them ever deeper into moments of surreal unease. Take this account from a player who encountered her in the mansion's candlelit room. Instead of disappearing after her scripted moment, she froze, standing eerily still in the hallway. She didn't move or react, simply staring down the player with lifeless eyes. What should have been a momentary scare turned into a lingering, spooky standoff. Another tale describes a moment when disabling the gas in the same room caused the girl to glitch completely. She ran erratically through the mansion, darting between rooms as if caught in a loop. Even stranger, she would stop and stand in odd locations, her static spectral form refusing to vanish, like it was intended to. Players have shared similar stories of her appearing in places she shouldn't, like the main staircase where she glitched into a permanent stare, refusing to vanish as intended. Others reported her reappearing later unaffected by previous interactions, as though the game wanted her to haunt the player persistently, even though we know this was never intended. One particularly chilling variation of this theme occurred in the attic. A player reported entering the final room, tense from the mounting dread of the mansion's story, only to find the ghost girl silently waiting. Unlike her usual appearance, there was no laughter to announce her presence, and she simply stood there ominously, never going anywhere. For a lot of players, particularly those who experience it, these alleged glitches really blur the line between Bethesda's intentionally scripted horror and weird, emergent gameplay, elevating the already spooky environment into something more. Whatever the cause of these player-reported events, it certainly added another layer to the horror already present at the mansion. To some players, the unintended nature of these incidents could make them feel far spookier than any scripted gameplay could ever be. Next, we're going to look at a player-reported story that's super obscure. Stories like this really pique my interest, not because they're universally experienced and well-known, but because of how personal and specific they feel. This one, reported by a player in 2018, starts during Fallout 4's prologue. Hardly the place you'd expect an unsettling moment to take place, well, other than the literal end of the world. After Codsworth badgers the player character to check on baby Sean, a figure in dark clothing was spotted by the player standing outside the nursery window. He lingered briefly, watching before walking away. The player who originally reported this incident, who thought they'd imagined the encounter, decided to restart their game to test their memory. Sure enough, the figure reappeared walking the same route outside. This time, astonishingly, they managed to take a screenshot, which led to a whole load of speculation amongst fellow Fallout players. Was this a mod the player had forgotten they'd installed? A bug? Or something deliberately hidden by Bethesda meant to be stumbled upon and puzzled over? The theories thrown about were varied. Some claimed the figure bears a striking resemblance to Deacon, the railroad agent who admitted he'd been keeping tabs on the player character long before their paths officially crossed. This led to the idea that his surveillance extended back to the pre-war era, for which of course there's a non-zero chance, but is something I think is completely insane and the biggest narrative stretch imaginable. Others have suggested it might be the Vault-Tec salesman distorted through the glass into something that looks a lot more sinister. Although I don't completely agree with this. I don't think the glass could have caused such a dramatic change. A few others insisted it's nothing more than a bug, a misplaced NPC, or a rendering issue that spawns assets in unintended places. And maybe that is the case, who knows. Still, the figure's behaviour as described feels deliberate in a way that glitches rarely do. According to the report, he doesn't appear frozen or out of place. Instead, he quietly walks away as though his presence is intentional but designed to be a bit of a narrative tease. Just enough to be noticed, but not long enough to confirm his purpose. And that's where the strangeness lies. For the vast majority of players, the prologue unfolds without any sign of this mysterious onlooker, leading to speculation that his appearance could be tied to very specific conditions, or perhaps even random chance. What makes this story so compelling to me, beyond its obscurity and the screenshot, is the context in which the mysterious figure appears. The prologue is designed to be idyllic, a snapshot of normalcy before the world ends. A stranger watching from the shadows undermines that security in a subtle juxtaposition, and if I'd experienced it, I'd probably have felt like the cracks in the veneer of pre-war life were deeper than they first appeared. For those who've never encountered this figure, of which we are the vast majority, his presence is definitely in the gaming urban legend category. One of those things you hear about but will probably never see for yourself. But in the unlikely event anyone else has seen this figure, share your stories with us in the comments. For our next dose of weirdness, we're going to take a look at something that was captured just 1 year ago in 2023. I'm being super specific for those watching this in the future. It's one of those moments that makes you stop in your tracks, unsure whether to laugh or feel unnerved. To be honest, probably both. A skeleton lying flat on its back, seemingly lifeless, until it wasn't. Slowly its head began to turn, moving in a way that felt almost intentional. One of its arms and feet twisted faintly, as though testing their ability to move, but the rest of its body stayed firmly planted like it was trapped in some invisible force, struggling to escape. The player who found it didn't know what to make of the scene, so they recorded it. What else could they do? There were no enemies nearby, no explanation for why this skeleton, out of all the countless ones scattered across the wasteland, seemed alive. It didn't try to attack, didn't react to the player's presence other than just shifting its head as though it were looking and listening. What made it even spookier was the lack of any sound, just the unsettling ambience of the room broken only by the skeleton's slow, jerky movements. We all know that it's more than likely just the jankiness of the creation engine that caused this, but it's proper creepy nonetheless. Looking at another inanimate object, this time we're going to a forgotten wing of a ruined hospital where there's a scene that feels almost too deliberate to ignore. Among overturned gurneys, shattered glass and bloodstains smeared across sterile tiles stands a mannequin, eerily motionless and surrounded by a circle of corpses. The bodies are arranged haphazardly as if their last moments were chaotic and panicked, but the mannequin stands untouched, pristine, as though it somehow presided over and orchestrated the carnage. This player report from June 2017 at first glance is easy to dismiss. The Fallout series has long used mannequins as part of its environmental storytelling, often placing them in unnerving or absurd scenarios. But this one feels different. The stark contrast between its flawless, lifeless face and the brutality of the scene around it leaves a spooky impression that's hard to shake off. There's no sign of a standard fight, no raiders, no feral ghouls, nothing to suggest how or why these people died. All that's left is the mannequin standing silently as though it knows what really happened but will never tell. The deliberate placement of this scene kicked off speculation amongst players. One player drew a comparison to the creepypasta The Expressionless, where a mannequin-like figure wreaks havoc in a hospital, leaving a trail of blood and death in her wake. While there's absolutely no confirmation this is an intentional nod or Easter egg, the parallels are uncanny. The sterile hospital setting, the unnerving mannequin, and the lingering feeling of unease is similar to that inspired by the creepypasta. Thinking about this scene and the mannequins in general, we could see the scene as a comment on humanity's fragility. Even after the world of Fallout was completely wrecked by nuclear Armageddon, even something as harmless as a mannequin outlasts the humans who, once upon a time, shaped the world around it. Its weirdly poised and calm presence amidst such chaos and carnage feels a bit like mockery, a silent witness to the endless cycle of violence and decay. But perhaps the weirdest bit about the whole thing is the mannequin's stillness. With Bethesda games well known for their glitches and unpredictable physics, you almost expect it to move when you turn your back or glance away, but it doesn't. It simply remains. Whatever its purpose, and whether it's a nod to an obscure creepypasta, this single mannequin gives a simple location an unnerving edge. It's not a boss fight or a quest. There are no rewards for exploring it, no answers to uncover. Just a chilling knowledge that something happened here, and even if the mannequin itself didn't cause it, its watchful form was there to see it all. As you all know, it's not the well-known stories that leave the strongest impression on me. It's the small, inexplicable moments, especially those where the game world feels slightly off. One such moment comes in the form of a player report from 2022 featuring an encounter with a gunner. A typical encounter until you realise something's missing. Their head. This wasn't a quick ragdoll glitch or a case of a decapitated body lying still on the ground. No, this gunner kept moving, fighting and attacking with the same determination as ever, completely unaware that their head was no longer part of the equation. A player shared footage of the Headless Gunner sprinting into battle, weapon raised, and behaving as though nothing is amiss. It's almost comical except for the lingering question, how could this be possible? Some believe it's tied to Fallout 4's mechanics for legendary enemies. When their health depletes, legendary foes mutate, restoring part of their health and gaining extra abilities. In this case, the mutation seems to have coincided with a decapitation. The game didn't quite know how to handle it, so it let the gunner carry on as if their head were still firmly attached. Other players take a darker perspective. There's something unnerving about a headless body still going through the motions, reloading, aiming, firing, following behaviours written into the code but stripped of all humanity. Without a face, without eyes, it's reduced to something closer to a machine, relentless and unthinking. The scene grows stranger the longer you watch. The body moves with eerie precision, entirely detached from the absurdity of its situation. Players who've encountered the glitch often find themselves torn between laughing at its absurdity and feeling creeped out. Whatever the explanation, the Headless Gunner has absolutely earned its place in the long list of strange encounters that make up the shared oral, and in this case visual, history of Fallout 4's player-shared stories. Deep beneath the murky waters of Fallout 4's Commonwealth lies one of the game's most enduring mysteries, a better known one to be sure, but one of my favourites, the Ghoul Whale. Known colloquially as Old Peg, this supposed leviathan has captured the imagination of players since release. While there's no confirmed sighting of this enormous ghoulified sea creature, tantalising clues scattered throughout the game world have led to countless theories. The most compelling evidence comes from NPC dialogue. Some characters offhandedly mention strange happenings in the water, and one even refers to Old Peg by name. Combined with the game's placement of buoys, more than 70 in total, players began piecing together a potential connection. Many of these buoys seem deliberately arranged, with some forming trails marked by dead fish. When shot, their bells ring out, sparking speculation that they're part of an elaborate puzzle or activation sequence tied to OPEG. Others point to the presence of harpoon guns hidden in the game files and Bethesda's history of crafting complex underwater environments in earlier games, like the Point Lookout DLC and Fallout 3. These details suggest that Fallout 4's ocean wasn't always intended to be the barren expanse it appears to be. Of course, not all players are convinced. Some argue that the Ghoul Whale is little more than a cut idea, its remnants left as tantalising breadcrumbs for the community. Others believe it was meant to be part of an unreleased underwater DLC given how many unused assets, like the harpoon gun, align with the theme. In a video released in early 2024, Synonymous speculated that OPEG might have been connected to a Fallout 4 cut quest, 20 Leagues Under the Sea. This unfinished storyline would have taken players to Vault 120, an undersea location discovered after repairing the Yangtze submarine in Here There Be Monsters. The quest revolved around the Vault's overseer, a sentient squid, who players could choose to free or imprison, uncovering the Vault's dark history of marine experiments along the way. If Synonymous's theory holds, OPEG might be a holdover from this lost quest, keeping its spooky legacy alive around Fallout 4's digital storytelling campfires. We've already touched upon the unsettling presence of mannequins scattered across the Commonwealth wasteland. They stand silently, often in odd positions, and usually seem to be nothing more than forgotten props of a bygone world. But one player's experience turned them into something far more sinister. In 2021, a player shared a story in which, after installing a mod that added stitched scars and grotesque smiles to the game's mannequins, they began a new save, eager to see how the changes would enhance the atmosphere. It should be stressed at this stage that the mod was simply reskinning the mannequins, at least that's all it said it would do. At first the mod seemed harmless, simply adding a layer of creepiness to places like Sanctuary Hills and the Museum of Witchcraft by making the mannequins look a bit spookier. Then the player stumbled upon a small bunker hidden in the far east of the map. Inside was a locked terminal and a cryptic log referencing a specimen banging on the door. Behind the door was nothing but a single mannequin grinning as though mocking its confinement. Things quickly escalated. While exploring the Commonwealth, the player noticed NPCs reacting to mannequins in strange ways. Raiders attacked them, firing round after round at the lifeless figures as though they posed a genuine threat. At Abernathy Farm, the player watched in disbelief as Blake Abernathy emptied his pistol into a mannequin in the fields, only to be struck down by some unseen force. When the player approached, the mannequin stood there in Blake's clothes, unmoving yet exuding an oppressive presence. What made this encounter even more chilling was that the mannequins never moved, not in the traditional sense. They didn't walk, didn't attack, and didn't animate in any way. Instead, their presence alone seemed to warp the game world. NPCs died inexplicably around the player. The player's character took damage from invisible sources, and any attempt to fast travel was thwarted with the ominous warning, enemies nearby. The final moments of this story are as disturbing as they are abrupt. While trying to track down a red blip on the compass, the player's screen flashed to third person as their character collapsed into a ragdoll. Standing over the lifeless body were two mannequins, one wearing Blake Abernathy's outfit, staring down at the corpse with its grotesque, scarred grin. So, was the weirdness the work of the mod sneaking in more than was advertised? A hidden mechanic already in the game somehow mistakenly triggered by the mod, or something entirely unexplainable? The player's experience left them and others questioning all of this. So what do you think? Have you experienced anything like this without the use of the mod? Or do you recognise this experience from adding in reskinning mods? Let us know down below. Next, we're going to take a look at a well-known piece of conjecture that has been hashed around back and forth between players for years now. The question of whether Fallout 4's sole survivor is a synth has become one of the game's most enduring digital campfire discussion points. One of the major inspirations for this theory emerged from a conversation with Dima, a synth introduced in the Far Harbor DLC. Dima, with a predilection for philosophical musings and moral grey areas, implies that the sole survivor's memories of pre-war life could have been implanted, a revelation that raised doubts about the sole survivor's identity. This ambiguity ties directly into the overarching themes of Fallout 4. The nature of identity, the blurred lines between humanity and machinery, and the moral grey areas created by the Institute's actions. It's no wonder that this was fuel to the fire of speculations about the sole survivor being a synth. But are Dima's assertions just a narrative device to make players question their character, or is there actually evidence to support the sole survivor being a synth? In terms of the arguments for this, the Vault 111 sequence itself is often cited by proponents of the theory. Unlike the other cryopods, the sole survivors functions perfectly, seemingly untouched by the catastrophic failures that killed the remaining residents. Given the Institute's confirmed interference in Vault 111, most notably their abduction of Sean, it's plausible they may have replaced the sole survivor with a synth during this time. Another recurring point is the protagonist's remarkable resilience. The sole survivor can shrug off radiation, master a wide range of complex skills, and engage in combat with near superhuman efficiency. These characteristics have led some players to argue they mirror the advanced capabilities of third-generation synths. This interpretation is further bolstered by gameplay mechanics, such as the ability to use VATS even before obtaining the Pip-Boy, a feature otherwise explained as Vault-Tec technology embedded in the device. The theory also hinges on Dima's suggestion that synths often retain fragmented or reconstructed memories of their human templates. While the sole survivor recalls elements of their pre-war life, such as their military service, family history, or Boston's pre-apocalypse culture, Dima's comments imply these recollections could be artificially implanted. Critics of the theory, on the other hand, point to significant inconsistencies. Fallout 4's narrative is filled to the brim with moments that affirm the sole survivor's humanity. From the Vault-Tec salesman recognising them later as a ghoul to the deeply personal reactions to pre-war artifacts and events. Conversations with characters like Daisy and Goodneighbor also reflect detailed memories of pre-war Boston that seem far too nuanced to be fabricated by the Institute. Not only that, but the Institute's leadership structure also presents a major contradiction. Father explicitly distrusts synths as potential leaders, evidenced by the absence of synth directors within the Institute hierarchy. If the sole survivor were a synth, it would contradict both Father's vision and the organisation's rigid control over synth autonomy. They're not exactly the railroad, after all. Gameplay mechanics further muddy the waters. Gen 3 synths are designed to resist radiation and lack the biological needs of humans, yet the sole survivor can contract illnesses, suffers from radiation poisoning, and requires food and water in survival mode. These limitations seem more like evidence for a human protagonist than an artificial creation. All that being said, the sole survivor as a synth theory may not have a definitive answer. For everything that's not been completely defined, there's a non-zero chance of various possibilities. In my view, the whole debate has been spawned by something the writers of Fallout 4 wanted to achieve anyway. By sowing the seed of ambiguity, Bethesda nudges players to reflect on the nature of identity and choice, which they've done in spades across the internet for years. So, in the absence of definitive evidence, the truth remains elusive, leaving it up to players to decide whether their protagonist is human, synth, or something in between. The only thing we know for sure is that it's something Bethesda wanted players to ponder. Another fun, quirky side note in the player-found obscurities of Fallout 4 is Clarland, officially titled RJ Angler Test in the game's code. This unused test cell, accessible only through console commands, captured the imagination of players who stumbled upon its bizarre and seemingly random assortment of objects and references. When players load into RJ Angler Test, they are greeted by a really weird collection of assets. A dead mole rat perched on a motorcycle, a fish sporting a gas mask, and brooms with screwdrivers strapped to their shafts are just some of the cell's peculiar features. Each object appears to reference popular media such as Disney's Fantasia or the children's book The Mouse and the Motorcycle. Other oddities include a buoy adorned with flowers and a Vim bottle, a Brahmin skull with pool balls for eyes, and even Jangles the Moon Monkey precariously perched on a frag mine. While the purpose of these items isn't explicitly clear, they seem to have served as placeholders for developers testing assets during Far Harbor's creation. Interestingly, saving the game within this cell reveals an unexpected name, Clarland. Whether this is an intentional Easter egg or simply a placeholder name left by a developer remains unknown. Players accessing Clarland through mods or console commands have shared their findings, often accompanied by speculation about the cell's purpose. Some believe it was a whimsical sandbox where developers tested environmental storytelling techniques, while others see it as a playful repository of in-jokes and media references. The discovery has drawn comparisons to other test cells in Fallout, such as QA Smoke, a debugging area crammed with every item and weapon in the game. However, Clarland's more curated collection of objects sets it apart, as if it were deliberately designed to evoke an air of surreal humour and nostalgia. Whatever the actual purpose of Clarland, it's an example of the community that forms around Bethesda games and how one player's discovery can end up shared and discussed all around the world. For every completely unconfirmed and fantastical urban legend shared, there's a Clarland that's completely legitimately true waiting in the wings. It's discoveries like this that make me feel there's always a possibility that the weirder, more obscure stories could be true after all. In 2015, a player managed to get evidence of something that had been discussed at the time and dismissed as impossible. It revolves around the USS Constitution questline and its most exciting moment, which happens after the quest's resolution: the ship's dramatic takeoff. So what was it that players thought was impossible? Well, there were tales of people jumping onto the Constitution as it takes flight from the earliest days of the game's release. And despite skepticism, it turned out to be true, provided you know where to stand and when to leap. The key, it would seem, lies in positioning. According to the video evidence, players must sprint to the rear of the ship just before liftoff. From there, a well-timed jump allows them to grab onto the deck as the Constitution ascends. While it's possible to survive the journey, being in the wrong spot can lead to instant death as the ship's collision zones become hazardous during flight. Not only can you hitch a ride, but it's also survivable, though tricky. Positioning at the very back of the ship offers the best chance of surviving the takeoff and subsequent landing. Players who watched the video shared their own variations of the ride. For those inclined to push boundaries further, some players have leapt off mid-flight with power armour cushioning their landing. Others have explored the ship's interior while airborne, though opinions differed on whether this adds to the experience or detracts from the spectacle of it all. One of the most amazing takeaways from the reality of this phenomenon is that, unlike many scripted sequences in Fallout 4, the USS Constitution's launch doesn't rely on a static model swap. Instead, the developers programmed the entire ship to move dynamically. This choice is incredibly technically challenging in the creation engine and is frankly pretty ambitious on the part of Bethesda. It really is an impressive feat for the creation engine, considering the ship's complexity and its location in Boston's dense downtown environment, which, at the best of times, can cause slowdown. The revelation that players could actually jump onto the Constitution with evidence caused a lot of excitement with players when it was posted in 2015. While some claim to have known about this already, and bear in mind the video was posted in the same year as the game came out, others said they'd never realised it was possible until stumbling upon the video, or forum posts that were shared later. In fact, it seems players have been finding this out all the way up to the present day. Perhaps some of you are here now hearing about this for the first time. Regardless, the feat remains one of those only in a Bethesda game moments that shine a light on the mad creativity and unpredictability of the game itself and its players. So yes, this was an urban legend for a short period of time, and then the video evidence came out, but it then became a tale shared online with new players finding out about it and its cool creation engine implications every year since the game's initial release. Preston Garvey, Preston Garvey, Preston Garvey. The endlessly annoying face of the Minutemen has, as you will all know, inspired endless memes, rage amongst players fed up with his incessant requests, and perhaps lesser known, a few interesting player theories. In amongst these is the one I find most interesting, the notion that Preston isn't the selfless leader he appears to be, but rather a cunning manipulator orchestrating events to his benefit. At first glance, Preston's actions, though annoying at times, seem altruistic. He rallies the sole survivor to rebuild the Minutemen and protect the Commonwealth. However, skeptics in the player base have argued over the years that his motives might be far more sinister. Preston's knack for knowing exactly when a settlement is under attack, coupled with his insistence that the sole survivor personally handles these crises, raises questions. How does he receive this information? The Commonwealth lacks widespread long-range communication systems and Minutemen radio's reach is limited. Some players have theorised that Preston has insider knowledge, perhaps even direct ties to raiders and gunners, allowing him to manipulate both sides of the conflict. By ensuring constant attacks, he consolidates the Minutemen's influence over settlements, positioning himself as an indispensable figure in the Commonwealth's survival. Sort of like Emperor Palpatine when he was orchestrating the war between the Separatists and the Republic. Preston's decision to make the player the Minutemen General after a single mission seems kind of insane when you think about it. Some players suggest that this move is a calculated strategy. By placing the sole survivor in the spotlight, Preston avoids scrutiny while maintaining actual control. As the so-called public-facing general runs from settlement to settlement fighting raiders and building defences, Preston's power grows quietly in the background. By the end of a Minutemen-aligned playthrough, Preston has effectively positioned his faction as the dominant force in the Commonwealth. The Institute and Brotherhood are gone, the Railroad remains niche, and the Minutemen control a vast network of settlements. All this is achieved with Preston rarely leaving Sanctuary Hills. The theory of Preston as a sleeper agent or secret villain gained traction over the years on forums like Reddit, where fans dissected his actions with conspiratorial zeal. Some even suggested he's a synth working on behalf of the Institute to destabilise the Commonwealth by fostering endless conflict. Others believe Mama Murphy's psychic abilities play a role, with her visions guiding Preston's manipulations. And her visions are a whole other kettle of fish. How does that even happen? Anyway, while many players have dismissed these ideas as overthinking what is ostensibly a poorly written character, the theory shines a light once again on Fallout 4's ability when it comes to unintended storytelling strength. Ambiguity, something we touched upon earlier with the "is the sole survivor a synth" theory. Whether you see Preston as a noble leader or a power-hungry opportunist, the game allows for multiple interpretations, something that's led to players gathering to debate these around the digital campfire. Ultimately, the theory of Preston Garvey as the true villain of Fallout 4 is, in my opinion, sadly unlikely to hold water. However, I love the fact that the community's creativity has allowed such theories to exist at all. Villain or not, Preston remains one of the game's most talked about characters, even if that's usually only because another settlement always needs your help. Deep in the spooky depths of Pinecrest Cavern in the Far Harbour add-on lies one of the strangest sights in the game. A massive humanoid skeleton embedded within a central stone pillar. Its proportions far exceed those of any known human or creature in the Fallout universe, and its positioning, grasping a skull and spine in its left hand and a skull faceplate in its right, raises tantalising questions about its origin and significance. Questions that have caused players to theorise as to what it's all about. The sight of the skeleton is bizarre even in the sometimes wacky world of Fallout. With its bony hand holding what appears to be a skull as a trophy, the scene could hint at ritualistic or symbolic intent. Perhaps the trappers, known for their brutal and chaotic nature, assembled the skeleton as a weird monument to their power, or more practically as a warning to intruders. However, even if that was the case, the scale of the skeleton is far too large to be human, suggesting it could be the remains of a mutated creature or something even stranger. Some players have theorised that it may be a relic from before the Great War, possibly a failed Vault-Tec experiment. Other theories have floated around in the community, with some suggesting it's a reference to Norse mythology, where giants often play symbolic roles in apocalyptic tales. Fitting for a post-apocalyptic world like that in Fallout. Alternatively, its grasp of the skull and spine could echo imagery from pulp horror, reminiscent of a being collecting trophies from its victims. Given the lower light nature of Pinecrest Cavern, this skeleton remains a mystery. Bethesda's silence on its backstory only deepens the intrigue, allowing players to project their own theories onto this bizarre site. Of course, Far Harbor as a whole excels at creating unsettling atmospheres, and the giant skeleton serves as a perfect encapsulation of the add-on's weird and spooky tone. So whether it's simply a gruesome decoration or a hint at untold stories, motifs, or themes, it is without a doubt one of the weirder things you can stumble across in your adventures. Only this year, May 2024 for those watching in the future, a player shared some thoughts about Sanctuary Hills and whether the idyllic suburban design may have ties to Vault-Tec's manipulative strategies. With its proximity to Vault 111, its colour scheme mirroring Vault-Tec branding, and the aggressive sales tactics of the Vault-Tec representative, fans have long speculated that Sanctuary Hills was more than a typical planned community. Vault-Tec's reputation for psychological manipulation and unethical experiments casts an ominous shadow over Sanctuary Hills. The house's blue and yellow paint schemes, very obviously reminiscent of Vault-Tec's corporate colours, raise questions about whether the entire neighbourhood was designed as a feeder, a source of test subjects for Vault 111. The proximity to the Vault, of course, adds a little bit of weight to this theory. Unlike other suburban developments in the game, Sanctuary Hills seems tailor-made to funnel residents into Vault-Tec's experimental cryogenic pods. Yet, if Vault-Tec had planned the community, why were so many residents denied entry on the day of the bombs? Some players have argued that Vault-Tec never intended to grant access to everyone. Instead, Sanctuary Hills, they argued, may have served as a controlled social experiment to study behavioural responses to perceived scarcity, desperation, and disaster. Adding another grim layer to this theory are the named feral ghouls encountered across the Commonwealth. These ghouls share names with Sanctuary residents, a pretty on-the-nose suggestion that they were the neighbours left behind during the chaos. Their transformation into ghouls, a relatively rare mutation, raises the possibility that the community's residents were pre-selected for their genetic suitability for ghoulification, echoing the experiments of Vault 12 in Fallout 1. Codsworth's dialogue even provides a bit of dark foreshadowing. He casually mentions a neighbour's child running around in a Halloween costume, a seemingly innocuous comment that takes on sinister undertones when paired with the eventual discovery of those same neighbours as literal ghouls. While Vault-Tec's role in designing Sanctuary Hills isn't in any way explicitly confirmed, the neighbourhood is undoubtedly emblematic of Fallout's broader critique of post-war American suburbia. Planned communities like Sanctuary, isolated, uniform and vulnerable to manipulation, mirror real-world developments of the 1950s built to capitalise on white flight and Cold War anxieties. Whether or not Vault-Tec directly planned Sanctuary Hills, its unsettling connections to Vault 111 and its residents' tragic fates have undoubtedly inspired speculation in the Fallout fanbase as to whether there's a deeper story going on between the lines of what we've all been told. Given the sprawling wasteland and towering half-destroyed structures that define the aesthetic of the Fallout universe, and Boston in particular, you'd be forgiven for thinking that its underwater world has remained largely unexplored. In fact, the opposite is true, with players embarking on literal deep dives into the Commonwealth's oceanic depths. Back in the tail end of 2015, a particularly dedicated Fallout 4 player spent weeks mapping the underwater terrain and documenting his discoveries. Amongst rusted debris and skeletal remains, he uncovered a bizarre assortment of finds that inspired a lot of speculation online. One of the standout discoveries was a sphere with the word "new" etched onto its surface. What this sphere signifies, whether a playful Easter egg, cut content, or an abandoned narrative thread remains unknown. Among other things, eerie and oddly placed, a skeleton in a wheelchair was discovered, along with dead enemies drifting eerily through the water alongside the remains of downed aircraft and scattered boats. Then there was a boat painted with numerous depictions of cats, accompanied by the text "meow," adding a strange, quirky humour to the otherwise bleak feel. And yet, these discoveries, while intriguing, lack the deeper lore or connections that Fallout fans might expect. The player who made these discoveries themselves admitted that their findings were more curious than of any major consequence. However, his exploration raises questions about why this vast underwater space exists at all. Could this be a sign of cut content? Speculation about Bethesda's development process suggests that they may once have planned more for Fallout 4's oceans. For instance, as we discussed earlier, the discovery of a harpoon gun, a weapon seemingly tailored for underwater combat, had fueled theories that aquatic DLC or missions were considered but never implemented, which then led to the discovery of the 20 Leagues Under the Sea quest many years later. Though the original poster and other players over the years found no earth-shattering secrets, some of the strange findings do beg some questions. Are they placed where they are just to fill up the world a bit and make it feel alive? Or are they clues to even more cut content yet to be discovered? Have you made any bizarre underwater discoveries that aren't well known? If so, I'd love to know more about it. Moving from one sea to another, the Glowing Sea is a place very obviously designed to unsettle. Its spooky ambience, broken only by the occasional rumble of a radiation storm, lulls you into a false sense of calm before the inevitable chaos erupts. But sometimes, even in an environment so clearly designed to make the player feel off-kilter, the wasteland finds new ways to surprise. A player in 2017 shared an experience in the Glowing Sea that would spook the life out of anyone who experienced it. Imagine the scene. You're trudging through the cracked earth and dead trees when, without warning, the sky becomes a theatre of madness. Rad scorpions, enormous and lethal, come hurtling down from above like grotesque meteors. Before you can even begin to process the absurdity of it, they hit the ground with a sickening crunch, dying instantly. As their corpses twitch unnaturally, more begin to claw their way up from the soil around you. Moments like what this player experienced feel like a glitch, because, of course, they are. Clearly the rad scorpions aren't supposed to fall from the heavens like some horrific divine punishment. It's the result of the game's engine failing to calculate spawn points properly, placing these enemies far above the intended terrain. And yet, the randomness of it somehow fits the chaotic vibes of the Glowing Sea. Is this something you've ever experienced? If you've been a victim of the rad scorpion rain, I'd love to hear about it. Moving away from the Glowing Sea, we'll take a look at a more urban location. The East Boston Police Station is one of those places that feels like it's hiding something just beyond the edge of reason. Its broken, weathered facade is unremarkable at first glance, blending seamlessly into the ruins of the Commonwealth. But once inside, the atmosphere changes. The air feels heavier as though weighed down by the station's history. And then the inexplicable begins, at least according to a short player story from 2016. According to them, a cell door opens on its own, the creak echoing down the cold, empty hallways. It's the kind of moment that freezes you in place, making you question what you just saw. Was it a breeze? A misstep from a companion? Or was it something else entirely? In Fallout, where literal ghosts roam, the idea of a haunted location doesn't feel entirely out of place. Could the station be haunted, or is it simply another case of the game's programming creating unintended moments of tension? Whatever the case, it got me curious about the location and whether there are actually meant to be spooky events happening there, as was the case in the Dunwich building in Fallout 3, for instance. The only way we'll ever know is if we can corroborate with other players who may have experienced paranormal events in this location. You thought you'd seen the last of him. Kellogg, the unrepentant mercenary, the Institute's hand-picked instrument of cold brutality, was nothing more than a memory, literally. His death was the inevitable conclusion of your path through Fallout 4's main quest, his cybernetically enhanced corpse left behind as you pressed forward in search of Sean. Yet, as some players have reported, Kellogg might not be entirely gone. The first report from 2018 is a strange tale. Imagine this. You're in Cambridge. The dull grey glow of the Commonwealth skies casting shadows as you fend off a pack of feral ghouls. Amid the chaos, a figure catches your eye. Human, deliberate, and eerily familiar. VATS confirms it. Kellogg. Before you can process this impossibility, you take him down, only to watch his body dissolve into the ground like a phantom. Then moments later, he's back again, relentless, unyielding, and just as mortal as before. This 2018 report of Kellogg's spectral appearances stirred equal parts fascination and dread among players. Some attributed it to the Freefall mod known for restoring cut content, while others speculated about bugs or overlooked elements buried deep within Fallout 4's labyrinthine code. The most tantalising theory, however, is that this ghostly encounter was an intentional inclusion. Cut content designed to toy with the sole survivor's psyche post-Kellogg encounter. The 2018 player experience with Ghost Kellogg raised questions. Was it a technical glitch, a remnant of code recycling Kellogg's character model, or a haunting manifestation echoing the player's tampered memories? The Freefall mod developer suggested it was meant to create the illusion of hallucinations, tying neatly into Kellogg's lingering presence in your mind. Another player a year earlier, 2017, shared their own unnerving experience of encountering Kellogg repeatedly across the Commonwealth after completing Dangerous Minds and killing him at Fort Hagen. Despite finishing the questline, they found Kellogg reappearing in various locations such as west of Bunker Hill, Cambridge, and even inside the Cambridge police station. Each time he would engage in combat, but after being defeated his body would vanish without offering loot or XP. Players speculated it might be related to how they initially killed him in Fort Hagen, using stealth without engaging in dialogue. However, further testing revealed no definitive cause. Others experiencing the same issue, similarly to the last player report, noted that mods such as content restorers, as we talked about earlier, or immersive gameplay modifications seemed to be a common factor, but crucially some players without mods reported the bug as well. This was definitely adding to the spook factor of the entire thing. Responses from the community to the 2017 player report ranged from treating it as a bizarre but fascinating glitch to jokingly suggesting Kellogg had become some kind of Terminator or ghost, eternally haunting the player. One commenter humorously remarked, "You're being haunted by regret, and regret has bullets." Some also compared the glitch to recurring bugs in other Bethesda games like Skyrim's reappearing dragon corpses, suggesting it might be a creation engine related quirk rather than something deliberate. For instance, it was said that players skipping or altering Kellogg's scripted dialogue before killing him might trigger the bug. In terms of mod interference, content restoring or immersive gameplay mods could unintentionally reintroduce Kellogg's spawn points. And finally, many affected players were using survival mode, possibly highlighting a niche interaction between the difficulty setting and the game's mechanics. While no solution was universally effective and no explanation fully satisfactory, especially for those experiencing this without mods, some players suggested trying to progress further in the main quest line or removing mods that alter quest or NPC behaviours. Others simply embraced the glitch, describing it as an accidental horror mode that added to their playthrough's tension. For me, I love the idea of Ghost Kellogg haunting the player with his presence long after they've ended him. I'm sad to say that I've never experienced it myself though, but I'm glad I got to come across a few player experiences of this amazing phenomenon. In 2021, a player shared a strange story revolving around Hubris Comics. It started innocently enough. They had just dealt with the ghouls inside Hubris Comics and decided to explore the crumbling remains of a nearby building. Boston's desolate streets echoed faintly in their headphones, wind sweeping through ruined alleys, the occasional growl of distant ferals. But then, in the midst of this familiar wasteland hum, it cut through. A phone ringing. The player paused. The sound didn't belong. The Commonwealth's phones were long dead relics, their dials faded and wires frayed. Yet there it was, insistent and haunting. They turned, scanning the ruined walls, but the sound was elusive. Every time they thought they were closing in, it shifted. It was behind them, then ahead, and sometimes maddeningly nowhere at all. This wasn't the first time players had reported hearing phantom sounds in the Commonwealth. Some swore by distant bells or gongs ringing without cause, while others recounted an eerie Scooby-Doo-esque noise at Hubris Comics. But the phone was different. It felt more immediate, more intrusive. A leftover sound effect from cut content? A bug triggered by mods? Or could it have been something more deliberate, a layer of mystery left behind by Bethesda to start unease? For this explorer, the phone became an obsession. They saved their game on the spot, vowing to hunt down its source. Other players speculated in the Steam forums, where the players shared their report. Could it have been a Wild Wasteland throwback? Obviously there's no Wild Wasteland in Fallout 4, but it's been a well-known part of the previous games. Is it a ghostly vestige of the pre-war world bleeding through? Or perhaps a mistake, a sound file misplaced in the game's sprawling code? Yet, as is the case with so many things in Fallout 4, it was the ambiguity that lingered. Did it really happen at all? Or was the player just imagining it all, or making it up to send other players on a wild goose chase? Have you ever heard the haunting ringing of an impossible to find phone near Hubris Comics? If you have, you know what to do. In 2017, a player reported a bizarre happening at County Crossing that turned their thriving settlement into a scene of complete chaos. After a Brotherhood of Steel vertibird crashed near the settlement's workbench, everything seemed fine. Settlers calmed down, life moved on, and the player left the settlement in good shape. But when they returned days later, they found their settlers endlessly firing at a Brotherhood pilot who somehow survived the crash. The odd part? The pilot wasn't fighting back. She just stood there, creepily still, her helmet intact, and worse yet, she had no collision. The settlers couldn't harm her, and neither could the player. Bullets went right through her as though she wasn't entirely part of the physical world anymore. The player described the unsettling scene as months of shouting and gunfire as the settlers continually targeted this ghostly figure. Attempts to interact with her failed, and her presence rendered County Crossing practically useless. The Haunting NPC refused to disappear, leaving the player desperate for a solution. Ultimately, the player turned to mods and managed to erase the Phantom pilot using Scrap All the Things, but not before sharing their experience of the ghostly Brotherhood of Steel NPC for other players to read. A number of players over the years have reported discovering 2 graves in the backyard of a crumbled house in Sanctuary Hills. This unexpected detail caused a bit of debate as to what it could possibly mean. The graves, unmarked and seemingly out of place, led to speculation about their origin. Theories have ranged widely on forums. Some players linked the graves to the lost Sanctuary Hills settlement idea, hypothesising that survivors of the Great War attempted to rebuild the neighbourhood but eventually failed. Others connected the graves to the pack of named feral ghouls we talked about earlier that roam the Commonwealth. These ghouls, as we've already discussed, share names with Sanctuary residents who were denied entry into Vault 111, suggesting that some survivors might have remained in the area, burying their dead before succumbing to ghoulification themselves. Nearby, evidence of a last stand adds to the intrigue. A house across the street features a makeshift barricade of tables, chairs and barrels, hinting at a desperate attempt to fend off attackers. Combined with the scattered workbenches, modifications to the garage and inconsistencies in Codsworth's story, fans have pieced together a theory. Sanctuary Hills may have hosted settlers post-war only to meet a violent end. Players have theorised that the graves in collapsed homes point to a battle likely between settlers and raiders. The damage to the prefab houses aligns more with targeted destruction than nuclear fallout, supporting the idea of a conflict within the settlement. Another player noted a terminal in the neighbourhood linked to a chem dealer, listing the names of neighbours and detailing their interactions. Could these graves belong to individuals tied to those stories? Or were they added as a purely atmospheric touch representing the countless untold tragedies of the post-apocalypse? One theory even proposed that Codsworth might have buried the dead out of a sense of duty while maintaining the household, though this remains speculative. He, of course, seems to deny that anyone stayed in the area since the war. So which story resonates with you? Are they hidden graves from pre-war nefarious activities? Or signs that Sanctuary Hills was settled between the end of the war and the sole survivor's return? There's an old saying that goes, if you travel far enough, you'll meet yourself. In 2019, a player who shared an eerie encounter while exploring the southwest region of Far Harbour seemed to add some truth to this old saying, but in a particularly grim way. They stumbled upon a corpse that bore an uncanny resemblance to their character down to the Vault 111 jumpsuit and familiar armour pieces. The spooky discovery prompted them to question its significance. Was it a glitch, a mod-induced oddity, or something deliberately placed by Bethesda to toy with the player's perceptions of their character's identity? Theories quickly emerged in the discussion following the player sharing their report. Some speculated that this might tie into Far Harbour's themes of identity and memory manipulation, especially with Dima's existential musings about whether the sole survivor could unknowingly be a synth. This echoes the chilling possibility we discussed earlier that the Institute might have replaced the player character at some point during their cryosleep or even after they awoke in Vault 111. However, others dismissed this as unlikely, noting the implausibility of the Institute creating a synth only to keep it frozen for decades. Another player suggested this could be an Easter egg or mod-induced feature, with certain mods known to add mysterious doppelgangers as a dark joke. Still others leaned toward the simpler explanation of a Bethesda bug, Bethesda being Bethesda, so to speak. In any case, this player's story, whatever the cause, fueled the debate on forums about the sole survivor's true nature. To be honest, it's just plain spooky and a bit mind-bending to come across a dead doppelganger. Imagine it happened in real life. It would be the freakiest thing imaginable. I came across a few stories similar to this on my journeys online, but not an avalanche of tales, so if this has happened to you, please do share your experience. Moving on to our next story, and I have to say, I absolutely love this story because A, it's so weird, and B, there's evidence as well. So, in 2021, a player shared a truly bizarre experience in which a distorted face appeared on the wall of a building in Sanctuary Hills. The strange visage only became visible when viewed from a specific angle, fading back into the normal texture as the player moved. They described the uncanny level of detail in the face with closed eyes and unsettling proportions, comparing it to something out of a nightmare. And looking at the picture, it kind of is. The post quickly gained attention, with other players speculating about the cause. Some dismissed it as a texture mapping issue where the game incorrectly loaded a face's normal map onto the wall's texture due to a resource loading glitch. Others leaned into the creepiness, joking that the game might be haunted or that the face belonged to one of the player's settlers. One particularly astute commenter identified the face as a generic female face map used for various NPCs in the game, meaning it could belong to characters like Marcy Long or even Piper. The distortion added an unnerving effect, making the glitch feel like something out of a horror story. Despite technical explanations and theories, the glitch certainly inspired imaginative ideas about haunted textures and spectral settlers. This has to go down as one of my absolute favourite Fallout 4 campfire stories. Hey, let me tell you about the time a giant face appeared on the wall of my Sanctuary Hills home. Love it. Moving on, this year, 2024, a player shared an unsettling experience with a glitch involving the sound of a crying baby echoing through the underground area near Vault 114. This wasn't the robotic cries associated with the General Atomics factory glitch. Instead, it was a hauntingly normal baby cry, disembodied and obviously seeming out of place. The player claimed they had never even entered the General Atomics factory in any of their playthroughs, ruling out the usual culprit for baby-related audio bugs. Interestingly, others chimed in with similar reports, speculating that the crying might be related to Sean's audio files somehow glitched into triggering in unrelated locations. One commenter suggested it could result from mods that bypass the intro sequence, though the original poster clarified they experienced this on vanilla saves. This glitch has left players baffled, especially since it occurred consistently over several playthroughs. Some theorised that it could be an issue with how the game handles preloaded audio assets, while others leaned into the eerie implications, joking about haunted stations or forgotten secrets of the Commonwealth. Whether a misplaced audio file or something stranger, the glitch has a beautifully uncanny feel to it, and I would love to experience this one myself. Another player way back in 2015 was clearly unsettled and shared their experience of a series of really rather freaky events while playing Fallout 4. They claimed to have noticed strange behaviour that made them feel like their character was being stalked by something unseen. It started with a strange sound every time their character died, a distorted slow-motion moan of pain that didn't seem normal. This was followed by Kate, their companion, repeatedly saying lines like, "Something's following us, we're being followed," or "I feel like we're being ghosted." This constant repetition over hours made the player increasingly paranoid, compelling them to constantly check over their shoulder in-game. What pushed them to seek answers on forums was a seemingly out-of-context comment from Paladin Dance during a Brotherhood of Steel quest. Before they could initiate dialogue, Dance ominously remarked, "Be sure to look in the shadows, you never know what's lurking there." The player noted that this comment had no bearing on the quest, making it feel all the more sinister. While commenters assured the player that Kate's lines are tied to the game's caution state when enemies are nearby and that Dance's comment was likely a standard NPC remark, the combination of events left the player feeling genuinely unnerved. Some commenters joked about invisible enemies, chameleon death claws, or even supernatural glitches. Others suggested restarting the console or reinstalling the game to clear potential bugs. A few humorous responses referenced classic gaming creepypastas, further fueling the player's paranoia. Ultimately, while the reported events might just be coincidental quirks of the creation engine's famously buggy nature, they stirred up two things that I love. Firstly, a blend of emergent gameplay I like to call emergent-inspired feelings. In this case, paranoia in the case of the player. And secondly, it brought people together as a community to have a bit of banter and theorise in a good-natured way. Well, apart from those who tried to make the poor player feel even more paranoid. Also in 2015, a player shared a spooky experience at Croup Manor, describing a series of strange occurrences that, like so many of these tales, seemed to blur the line between unintentional glitches and creepy emergent storytelling. Initially, they left their companion McCready at the settlement and later encountered a synth attack there. After dealing with the synth, they received the usual "thanks for helping us" dialogue. However, upon fast travelling away, they were hit with a mission failed message. They brushed it off as a potential bug. Much later, they returned to retrieve McCready, only to find him and half the settlement's population missing. Despite the settlement counter stating 10 residents, only 5 were visible. Those remaining settlers behaved bizarrely. No one farmed, used the beds, or interacted, apart from one bartender and a lone artillery operator. Convinced the settlement was infiltrated by synths, the player embarked on a killing spree only to discover none of the settlers dropped synth components. Whoops. Upon receiving advice from other players, they discovered the missing settlers, including McCready, standing eerily still by the shoreline, seemingly frozen in time. Fast travelling didn't resolve the issue, and the haunting vibe of the settlement lingered. Another commenter noted that Croup Manor is notoriously buggy. Despite the likelihood of a glitch, the spooky behaviour of the settlers made the experience creepily memorable. Another player, this time in 2020, shared a peculiar experience involving what they described as a ghost elevator. While exploring Cabot House, they noticed an unusual structure near the stairwell in the main foyer. Initially unfamiliar with the house's layout, they realised the structure felt oddly out of place. Upon further investigation, they discovered they could walk straight through it, revealing its interior, an elevator that seemed to exist purely as a visual glitch, with no physical or interactive components. Assuming it was a one-off bug, they moved on. However, the same phenomenon repeated itself later at Pickman Gallery, where another seemingly phantom elevator appeared in a similar fashion. Unable to find any mention of this specific issue online, the player turned to the community for answers, questioning whether this was merely another of Fallout 4's infamous glitches or something a bit spookier. In the comments, others shared their unusual experiences at Cabot House, though not all were elevator related. One commenter recounted being chased around the house by a hostile super mutant, adding to the sense that strange things often occurred there. Another user asked whether the ghost elevator moved up or down. The original poster clarified that it was completely static with no interactive functionality. It was as if the elevator's image had been mistakenly pasted into the environment without the supporting code. So, was this simply a visual bug or an accidentally atmospheric oddity unintentionally introduced into the game? Whatever the case, I love the story, mostly because it's just so completely bizarre. In May of 2024, during the Dangerous Minds quest, one player encountered a particularly unsettling moment while viewing Kellogg's memories. They described walking into the final memory sequence with Sean only to find the child immediately locking eyes with them. Sean's gaze remained fixed on the player as they moved around the room, even when they went upstairs. Despite Kellogg and the cursor following their scripted behaviour, Sean continued to track the player intently throughout the scene. Spooky Sean, we might want to christen him. This unnerving behaviour persisted through his dialogue with Kellogg up until the moment Spooky Sean stood to leave with the cursor. The player noted how this felt deliberate, as though it was designed to heighten the tension in what is already an undoubtedly emotional and mysterious questline. But of course, we all know it's not the way that things should be. Some players suggested this could simply be a bug with Spooky Sean's animations glitching during the memory sequence. One commenter joked that the game might be haunted and suggested calling the Ghostbusters. Either way, the experience of Spooky Sean left the player thoroughly creeped out. And there you have it, we've reached the end of that giant pile of campfire tales from Fallout 4. So, as we cleanse our minds of these tales of potentially glitch-induced terror and tantalising mysteries of many flavours, it's clear that Fallout 4's haunting allure and inspiration for online oral storytelling is just as potent as for the other games I've covered so far. Honestly, I probably could have put together a 3-hour video on this, but I wanted to get it out. There are so many stories out there to do with Fallout 4. These supposed ghost stories, eerie glitches, and unsettling encounters have spawned a whole community of people around them, sharing them, theorising, debunking, and in many cases just enjoying the spectacle of it all. It's so fun just to imagine sometimes that there's more life in the games we play than was intended. Something deeper, something mysterious, something unknowable. Fundamentally, whether these experiences are echoes of cut content, remnants or unintended consequences of Bethesda's ambitious storytelling, or simply the unpredictable nature of the creation engine, they continue to enrich Fallout 4's strong community of storytellers. There's never going to be a shortage of stories to share around the campfire when it comes to this game, or any of Bethesda's games, and I can only thank the people who have shared these experiences. It's been an absolute pleasure to put this together, and I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.